Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the Brandon Select Board of June 10th. First item is to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion relative thereto? Mr. Lyman moves the agenda. Is there a second? Mr. Coolidge seconds. Any changes to be made to the Select Board agenda as it's printed?
Yeah, I was going to give an update on the transfer station.
Okay. Can we do that perhaps between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7? Or between 5 and 6? Transfer station update between 5 and 6. I want to add on an executive session for the appointment or employment or evaluation of a public officer or employee per Title I VSA Section 313A3, and that would come after the fiscal items. And just for the planning purposes of those in the room, we'll go through the agenda, through the fiscal items, and then the Select Board will recess. We'll convene the Board of Sewer Commissioners, have that meeting, and then the Select Board will reconvene in the executive session, if it's approved by the Board. Any other changes to the agenda? If not, all in favor of the agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Item 2, approval of the minutes of May 27th.
So moved.
Mr. Wyman moves to approve.
Second.
Mr. Bailey seconds. Any errors or omissions in the minutes as submitted? None heard. All in favor of the minutes as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Item 3, the town manager's report. Mr. Atherton.
That's the report for the weeks of May 27th and June 3rd. Union Street sidewalk, we will be opening the bids this Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Park Street, we finally have received the NEPA document. We're still planning on bidding the project out for construction this year, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. 2-week look ahead for segment 6, I'll be brief with this. Sidewalk preparation installation in segments E and D, Crescent Park, Lot A, and Central Park areas, both concrete and brick. Permanent paved base within C, which is downtown. Placement of topsoil and hydro seeding around town. Night activities in C, they're doing ledge removal. Actually, all they really have left now is drainage and water tie-ins to the buildings. Roadway and underground utility improvements within segment A, which is the first section south, including drilling and blasting of ledge. Franklin Street and Briggs Lane head walls associated with stormwater will be completed. Water fountain relocation, preparation and placement within Central and Crescent Park. And they're going to continue landscape plantings. They're hoping to get a bunch of plants in here within the next month or so it'll look nice. Just a little update on Route 73. I know it's not our project, but it does affect us. Drainage work and cross pipe excavation will be going on next week in the reclaimed areas. Crews will continue to place gravel along reclaimed surfaces, bring roadway to grade, and they are scheduled to work on Saturdays on June 15th if folks are traveling over the mountain this weekend. Brandon Rec. Had an amazing weather for the carnival this weekend. The addition of the Neshamie Lothrop concert, Brandon Idol finale, Family Feud, baking contest, New England Wildlife Encounter, and Kids Talent Show pushed attendance back up, despite having fewer rides due to labor shortage affecting Miller Amusements. A huge thanks to our generous sponsors and the dozens of Vermont volunteers that helped to make our third carnival an unmitigated success. Baseball season is wrapping up. Middle school lacrosse is also wrapping up thanks to coaches Tyler Peterson and Jared Feckel and girl coaches Chelsea Reed and Allison Callahan. Swimming lessons start on June 24th at Brandon Inn. Theater writing camp with Lennon Philo begins on June 24th right here at the Town Hall. And that's really all I have for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Atherton. Any questions for the town manager regarding his report from the board? Mr. Coolidge?
No.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes. First, I'd just like to comment and say segment 6 is really looking good. And I think people are starting to see it come together, which is making people feel it's worth the aggravation and the traffic. So it seems to be a lot less complaining now that they're seeing things. That's so good. And then I was only With the Miller amusements, where they had fewer rides and a labor shortage, did they also give us a smaller fee, or was the fee just as big?
I don't know what that would be. They'll work that out with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would hope that we didn't pay a full price if they didn't have an office of full service. All I can.
Mr. Giles?
Yeah, I was just curious, did you say that the utilities in Section A are going underground? And is Section A the part north of town?
No. The utilities in Section C are going underground?
Yeah.
Section A is the south end, so from
Goes the other way.
like Whitaker's in the library south would be A. Yeah, the only underground is from the library to right out here on the corner of this lot.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Wyman?
Just on Park Street. Somebody asked me about it today, and I told them I could find out, what I just did, but I just still don't plan on paving that this fall with the state.
The state's probably not doing it until spring, because I don't think they're doing the final top coat of 73 until spring.
Okay.
So we should be okay. And we actually weren't even sure if we were going to put it out to bid this year because it's late, but we've had a lot of interest on it, so I think we'll be getting some competitive bids out of it.
Good, thank you.
Questions for the public, from the public for the town manager? Anybody have a question for Mr. Atherton tonight? Nobody. Okay, we'll move along. Item 4 is public comment and participation. This would also be the board's opportunity for items not on the agenda, so we'll start with the board. Mr. Wyman, anything not on the agenda? Mr. Giles, you've put your item on the agenda. Mr.
Yes.
Bailey?
Yes, I would just like to thank Mr. Wyman publicly and every out of the minutes for repairing Basin Road potholes again. So, he does it all the time, and I think we should get recognized for it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Wyman.
Yeah. I live at the end, so.
So do I.
It's better to beat yourself.
Nice to be smooth.
And it's just where it comes off the asphalt.
Mr. Coolidge? Anyone in the public with comment or participation for any item at all? Brent Bueller.
Has there been any discussion or, I guess, concern about the upper falls, the condition of it?
The dam?
The dam.
I've brought that up to Mr. Burlett a number of times. So he assures me that in the condition that it's in, where all the flow kind of goes, you know, it's directed in one corner, it's directed at ledge. He doesn't think it's in danger of undermining the parking lot or the structure, the town deck, anything like that. He has it on his, you know, long-term, low priority, not a big sense of urgency radar.
Okay.
That's as far as I know. Do you have additional information?
Because it sprung a lot of leaks too within the
It is,
thing,
it's
so that
weeping, yeah.
maybe he can find a grant.
We talked even about a grant. We talked about it.
If there's one out there, he'll find it. I had another comment.
Yes.
I saw in the paper that Middlebury had trouble with their covered bridges, and they're putting in overhead type warnings that if you hit it, you know, like parking garages would have something, or if that's better than keeping to replace it, the one up here in town all the time. I don't know.
That's a good thought. I don't know whether the folks in the neighborhood there might think it was intrusive.
We talked about it, 2 different ways to do it. Unfortunately, the first, where it looks like it breaks a lot, it's kind of built that way, so that's why the siding hangs much lower than the trusses do, so the vehicle, you know, just kind of brushes on it, but it happens a lot.
So it's like an internal.
You know, we thought about putting a bar across it, but that just, you know, and who's liable for all that damage? And I mean, we've got a bazillion signs out. The problem is these commercial vehicles are using GPS like you and I would, and they're bringing these trucks up these roads. It's actually a state problem right now. And I know
There's been two more hit last week in the state.
Yeah, and but Sean and I have talked about it quite a bit, that they're looking for, there's probably going to be some discussion about play around what to do with these vehicles with their GPS, so, yeah.
So I'm curious, you know, with this idea of having something that measures the height of the truck before it gets to the bridge, because I've seen them in drive-throughs like at fast food restaurants that are physical. But do they have electric eye?
I don't know, I've got Alderman's car wash just opened. You know, for the
Is it
same
just an
thing.
electric eye?
I don't know how it does. No, actually, Alderman's has like this banner with a metal rod at the
Well,
bottom like that, so.
'Cause
You
I
know,
know
but it
that-
moves a little bit, so if you
Yeah.
hit it, it won't smash the
I should
window.
understand the obtrusiveness in the neighborhood of having some structure that looks like this, you know, industrial piece of work. But if it were just something where we could put a couple electric eyes up that would be triggered when a vehicle of a certain height, you know, cuts the beam, and then you could have, you know, a warning light come off on the bridge or something, that seems like an intermediate solution to an industrial alarm.
Maybe a portcullis could descend, prevent access.
I mean, you would think that, you know, from Route 30, as the roads turn to dirt and get narrower and narrower, that a truck driver might think that he's on the wrong road. That does not deter them.
I mean, and as a truck driver, you're supposed to know the height of your truck.
Yeah.
They just need to be starting more tickets and more aggressive on that.
Well, like, you know, we were fortunate we caught the last one. You know, that, I mean, a lot of them go through it at nighttime or whatever, and you just don't catch them, so.
Is that something you can investigate a little bit, Mr. Bell?
Yeah,
Maybe
maybe
some
some
kind
kind
of
of discussion, so, yeah.
Very good. Other public comment? Yes.
Do you know if Mr. Moore has an update on the Smith Block parking from the owners there? They were looking at alternate solutions.
I do not know. Mr. Atherton, do you have an update for
Not heard
the block parking?
anything yet, so.
Okay.
Those apartments are supposed to be open for occupancy in late summer, is that right?
Someone's in there now, I can say that.
Maybe.
I know that they've only got like 4 left, so I don't know.
You sure?
Apparently someone moved in, but I don't know yet, yeah.
I thought.
They were, I was in there like a month ago, and they were pretty close to done then, so.
So I guess we don't have an update.
Okay.
Other public comment? Okay, if not, we'll move along. We have a wetlands discussion update. I'll ask Mr. Giles, who's been the select board liaison to the steering committee, if he has anything to impart.
Right, I've been to 2 of their steering committee meetings, and as a liaison, a townsperson. And they're making progress. They're sending out landowner letters this coming week. And this is for anybody who's currently in the Class 2 wetland swamp defined footprint. And it's basically to invite them to a public conversation, is what they're calling it, to get people to be able to ask questions about what this change would mean. The result of my going to these meetings is really to become aware of how small a change this really is. This is, the Class 2 wetlands already have requirements for permitting to allow people to do whatever they might want to do in land that abuts the swamp. And the Class 1 is essentially the same, except it's 50 feet further away from the swamp to protect the land right next to the swamp. The last thing I would say is just that as I've been thinking about this, the wetland issue, it is a growing awareness, and certainly Hurricane Irene is the biggest example of this. When Irene blew through our town, logically it should have blown through Middlebury because it's a path from here to Middlebury. And the reason it didn't blow through Middlebury is because we have the swamp that was able to buffer that huge amount of force that disrupted our town and didn't disrupt Middlebury. And that's one example of the wetland. There's actually 10 different areas that they go into. And so what I come out of this experience of going to the meetings is an awareness of something called the tragedy of the commons. And this is where you have, back in 1900, Garrett Hardin wrote about the use of a common space for public good. And people used to graze their cows, and everybody was allowed to bring their cow and graze it in the public good. And, you know, if too many people grazed, the public good was degraded to where nobody could use it. And ultimately, the solution to the tragedy of the commons is where we come together as a community to protect a resource that we all depend on. And what this experience on these committee has shown me is that this wetland is a profoundly important piece of our of the health of our community and our region. We're actually the largest wetland in New England, not just in Vermont. It's almost 15,000 acres, extending from Brandon to Middlebury. I think the last thing I would say is that there's kind of two reasons to support this project. One is that just from a pure insurance basis, it costs us nothing to support this endeavor, which will protect these wetlands a little bit more than they already are protected. And of course, the second is a completely positive attribute, which is that having the largest wetland in New England in our backyard is actually a draw. I mean, people would come and will come and will want to see this space, and we could make a small investment in a little parking area and a little boardwalk that walk them out into the swamp, and it would be, you know, a fine part of our community. So that's my update.
So I have a question, if I could, because you've been to these steering committees.
Right.
Is it fair to say, and I'm only asking this because I'm reading the material that they're sending out to us, is it fair to say that this is not a study committee? This is, they've made a decision, this is an advocacy group?
Right. They're concerned that it's probably represented as community people that came together to do this. They're getting support from state biologists and people that understand the science to support them. But this is basically two community groups in Cornwall and Salisbury that have commissions who are interested in protecting wetlands. And so yes, they're advocating for change from class 2 to class 1.
Okay.
I'm in favor of it from a perspective as they presented it to us. Yeah, the presentation just left me with this big question like, why? I mean, what's the difference between 1 and 2 other than 50 feet difference or 100 feet difference from developing, and it's already there. And my biggest fear is that after we get down this path, they're going to somehow then throw in a zing that says, oh, in a class 1 waterway, we can't spray larvicide and we got to let the mosquitoes go wild there or something. And I'm opposed to that because, you know, again, as many people will come and walk the boardwalk, we'll probably have to have a repellent stand at the end to sell mosquito repellent so they can go out there. So, you know, that's what I worry about is if all of a sudden at the end we find out some little tidbit that we don't know or that they haven't told us now.
No, and that's it's one of their biggest concerns to one of their frequently asked questions. The first thing on their information sheet that they are sending out to landowners is, you know, will this affect the mosquito district? And it won't. I mean, at this point, it says right in their statute that they have no authority to control the mosquito spraying in any way, and that anything they've been allowed to do in that area, they can keep doing, as long as it's best science. And that's what the mosquito district does. And so the difference between class 2 and class 1 has nothing to do with mosquito control. The thing it does have to do with, in addition to this 50-foot buffer, is if you want to get a permit. Now, already it's difficult to permit in a class 2 swamp. It's a process that makes it so you don't develop right next to a class 2 swamp. They heighten the requirement that it's got to be public safety or public health as the only reason they will permit in a class 1 swamp. And so it's just very slightly more stringent.
So an agricultural use.
Agriculture use will still be allowed. If you have been farming the land in a Class 2 swampland area, you can still farm it in the Class 1 swampland area. Silviculture, logging, you can still do. All the things that you, traditional uses, if you have a hunting camp there, you can still have a hunting camp there. You just can't do new things there. So like if you haven't farmed there in the past and you decide you want to clear some land and start farming there, that wouldn't be allowed.
But you could do it if it was Class 2.
My understanding, it would be difficult to convert it to farmland even in Class 2.
But I think it's possible that it could be done. From my understanding is that it's possible that it could be done in Class 2, but it's almost impossible to have it done if it was Class 1.
That's correct.
But are you talking about 50 feet? Is the difference
50
just 50 feet? You just wouldn't be able to reclaim that 50 feet for farm. Correct?
And specifically, they talk about traditional use, so if you've been farming, you can keep farming.
Right.
Isn't there another public meeting in Cornwall this month?
They have 2 public meetings coming up, one
Yeah.
of them in Cornwall.
Yeah.
That's what these letters are going out to invite people to attend.
So one thing on that, we're also in the process of rewriting our river corridor regulations, which, we've already got flood regs, we already have river corridor, and no one's gonna build out in the swamp anyway, but, there's restrictions, and newer restrictions with that you have to, if you have an existing structure, you have to work within, like if you're, say, 40 feet from the river, you have to be at least 50 feet from the current river now, back to even if you're extending out towards the river. So, with our flood regs and our river corridor, we're kind of already restricting that sort of development in those areas anyway. I don't know what difference it would really make, either way, good or bad. I think that because of what's already existed, and I think we've learned the importance of having a place where floodwaters can go. Newton Road is a perfect example.
Yeah.
That, bad idea to build things that close to wet areas anyway.
No, I would agree that I consider this a relatively small change, but it's a small change in a good direction for no cost.
I went to the river corridor one the other night, and Bernie kept asking about this Class 1 conversion over here. And the gentleman kept saying, that's not what we do, we're over here, they're over here. So there really was no unified dialogue or conversation about how this all comes together. To David's point that, they're already doing some of this anyway, but they act like they're 2 different entities and neither of them communicate.
Our swamp areas would probably come in more under what the flood hazard areas are, because it would be a high flood hazard area, which we don't allow anything in anyway. And the river just happens to go through the middle of it, so.
But they act like they don't have phones that talk to each other or anything, because there's no unified picture of the process, so to speak. And they said that, FEMA hasn't done studies for decades, and they're not going to do studies, even though we have a new culvert and everything is different. They said it doesn't matter, even though FEMA's paid for it. They said they don't really communicate.
Well, they have to do a map amendment, which we asked them to do, so we'll see when they show up. FEMA's a little busy, I think, down south right now, so. But we'll get there.
The board has received a letter from the mosquito district, and we do have our delegate, Wayne Rosenberger, and we have the chairman, Dr. Ben Lawton. I don't know if either of you gentlemen would like to.
Unfortunately, I didn't get a copy to Tim because I didn't have his new email address, so if you want to give, he hasn't seen this document that I sent out.
I sent it along to him.
Oh, you did? Did you get a chance to review it?
Yes.
Well, the first thing in the slide that the one young lady had here, it does say, as you said, wetland impacts permitted only for compelling public need to protect public health and safety. So any farming that's done on these lands, if that farmer stops farming and starts having trees grow up on there, he can't cut those trees and he can't revert it back to farming again. So there's some really compelling issues about land use in that converting it. Secondly, the floodplain is going to absorb the water, whether it's class 2 or class 1. It's still going to absorb that meandering water. And anybody, as you said, that builds in one of these floodplains, they can't get floodplain insurance, and so it's pretty much a non-issue about building or putting construction projects in the floodplains, to my way of thinking. It does have some compelling issues, I feel, for mosquito control. They say right now that it's not going to affect it, but on the second page here, I have so much land that's gone in, over 3,000 acres about gone into NRCS through the USDA, and we have a lot more permitting issues to do mosquito control on those wetlands that are in the wildlife or in the floodplains that are controlled by the Fish and Game Department. So there's a lot more work that we have to do, time, energy. We don't have the staff to do all of that like they have, free staff. The next step would actually be at some point to convert it to a national wildlife refuge from a class 1 to a class national wildlife refuge. And in that, there is no mosquito abatement permitted unless it's an emergency system where you have a compelling public health need like equine encephalitis or something like that. So the program is reactive rather than proactive, and they provide no funding, either the wildlife or the national park system or any mosquito abatement. It all needs to be done by private entities. So I think there's a lot of issues that I'm concerned about. Has
the mosquito control district had any contact from the steering committee?
No, they never approached us. I think it's an end run by the Toxic Action Committee. They come around the back door and try to, get us from another angle.
I think that's a mischaracterization. One of the reasons that the steering committee specifically puts as one of their first responses is to clarify that the difference between a class 2 and a class 1 swampland has nothing to do with the mosquito district. There will be no restrictions by going from a class 2 to a class 1.
At this point.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Well,
I mean, if we want to talk about some future change, then I'm ready to address those at that time. But I just want to be clear that this has nothing to do with the mosquito district.
well, that's what they said. I haven't seen that in writing or communications from them.
Tim, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Just to maybe clarify, there wasn't any discussion in the meeting about folks that currently own this property to enroll in like a nature conservancy or release easements to whoever. I mean, the landowners are still going to be the landowners regardless of what classification the land is.
And some of them will opt out of the mosquito control district, spring, and some of them won't. And that's still the case. There's no effort to accumulate landowners to...
There's no list of restrictions that they're going to have to record or, so...
No, it's not an easement of any kind. No.
It's a classification.
It's a classification change.
So while you're talking about landowners, a good percentage of the landowners that were here on our closing the class 4 road that I spoke to, they are not in favor of switching this to a class 1 level.
Well, and they're certainly going to be welcome to come and voice their concerns.
Right.
And I should say, it's less than 50. They've given us a list of the properties that fall into this, that are going to be getting the landowner letters. And there's less than 50 properties in Brandon.
Well, I think we only had 68 landowners for the river corridor, and that's with Nishabee and Otter Creek, so...
And that's just a small portion, but it's still, the floodplain continues down into Proctor and into Pittsford also. They're just addressing the northern end of it at this point.
Well,
And
there's a class 2 swamp that's designated, and that's the part that they're working on, changing the designation. So we're not interested in going after wetlands that are just peripheral to this, is a boundary.
I got, do you know when this started, when this project started?
I think it was 6 or 8 months ago.
Okay, so when they did the presentation, they said they wanted to have it done by August. I want to know what the rush is. Nothing in the happens like that.
Well, the process is actually, it plays out in many, many steps. And the part that they want to have done by August, they actually have some free labor from AmeriCorps. There's someone who's helping to organize meetings and to gather data and to make mailings. And so it's a staff person, basically. And that's why they're hoping to get most of that work done by August. But then it enters a fairly lengthy, and Zapata showed us this when she showed us the presentation, where it has to go to the first, group of people that make the decision, and the second group of people, and then they have to enter it into this, and it goes over to here, and it goes through a long chain after the initial request is made.
But the public participation opportunity is kind of the earliest stage only. Does that sound right?
I don't think that's right either. I think that they're interested in getting as much public input as early as possible, so they address questions and try to avoid having this sense that it's a land grab or an end run, as you called it.
Definitely.
Why weren't we notified a long time ago then?
This is when the process is beginning. I mean, they've been
You
gathering
said it began
information.
6 months ago.
Well, I think people have been talking about it, meaning these commissions, and this.
Right, it's been the same people that were trying to shut us down up in Salisbury before.
I think you'll find that there's no conversation in the steering committee meetings I went
I'm
to.
sure that they're not going to say that in the steering committee.
So it's some kind of secret cabal that's out to get you.
Well, it's the people from the Moose Association and the Toxic Action Committee. And if you look at the members that are probably part of this other organization, I'm sure there's some cross agreement.
Well, I'd be happy to have you.
I'd be happy to come.
Great, you're welcome to. These are all public meetings.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
The other thing I think that you need to think about is when they converted the Dean Farm down here to more wetlands, okay, there were 4 restrictions put on NRCS to get their permit. We had a meeting, the meeting was adjourned so they could do a site visit. They had another meeting, and what happened was the fellow from NRCS makes a statement that we've never been denied this permit in 25 years. So I'm hearing this and I'm thinking to myself, why are we here? They're going to do what they want to do. So now you're telling me that they're going to take a class 2 and make it a class 1. They're just going to do what they want to do, even when they get class 1. Whatever they decide is going to happen.
This isn't NCRS doing this stuff.
No, I understand. I'm just saying.
That's one
We
of
had
the,
one of the groups, they come in to look for something, they say, well, we need a permit, but whether we get the permit or not, we're gonna do this. So I'm just worried about this class 2 to class 1. To me, it's a land grab. And I think that the people that own their land, that are farming it, or logging it, or whatever, if for some reason they stop for a year or 2 years,
It actually has to be
and they
5
wanna go
years.
back to
It
it,
has to be 5 years.
all right, whatever it is, 5 years that they can't ever do it again, that's not right. What happens if they want to go and sell their property to somebody that wants to do that? They can't do it?
Well,
It's wrong.
You are representing an accurate component of this, which is that this is a public good. This is what I started off with. We all have an interest in this land being protected. And it will limit some of what you can do with that in the future, and that's to the benefit of the whole. That is part of what public goods are all about.
well, let me read about public good here. The U.S. Fish Wildlife Service considers native mosquitoes a part of the natural ecosystem and the natural wildlife refuge system. Refuge habitats in which they occur. The system of the service allows mosquitoes on refuge to exist unimpeded unless they pose a specific human and health risk. So again, it's reactive instead of proactive. And they don't provide any funding for it. This is a wildlife refuge. It's not the same program, but it's the same government control of different entities. And Fish and Wildlife is certainly going to be involved in this, and they're involved in the conversion of the NRC lands also. That would be an option that the farmers, if they wanted to sell it, I mean, they get probably $1,000 an acre to put it into conservation, I believe. So there's been about $2 million spent on converting 3,000 acres already to to the conservation program.
At no benefit to the town.
Well, I don't know, did you lose tax base from the conversions on the Dean property?
They're already in current use.
Really?
Yeah, most of those properties are.
Yeah.
So, we don't make a lot of tax money off wetland anyway. I mean, from the ones we've sold, you know,
Yes.
it's $200 a year maybe.
But thank you.
Thank you for the information. Tim, is the steering committee, are they looking for votes of select boards, or are they looking to just continue with their process with some participation from each select board, or have we got anybody from the planning commission? We talked about a planning commissioner maybe going. What's the status of the process, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Right. They are not soliciting select board endorsements. They're doing their best
They
to...
don't require it.
No, not at all.
The process doesn't require it.
No. They're encouraging open communication so people know what's happening, so they don't feel surprised when they come up with when they see things in the news about what's going on.
So it would seem to me like the same way that Wayne referenced the Creek Road thing, that the landowners should be the ones that have the majority of say on what happens with their land as they currently own it. You know, I mean, I would agree with that it's their property and there should probably be some more public hearings to discuss this with the folks, maybe formally invite them to
The letters
discuss.
to invite them to a hearing or to a meeting are going out this week.
Okay.
And the point you raise of who should have the say over protecting the public good is, I think, pivotal to this conversation. If the swamp is what science tells us, with water purification and wetland mitigation with flooding and heavy storms and wildlife and there's a whole series of benefits to us, then it's not just the individual landowner's interest involved here, it's really everybody's interest.
So, right, but I still feel like, and like I said before, I don't think, personally as a town or even as a town, I don't think we care either way because we already have things in place.
Exactly.
You can't fill in a wetland in Brandon, you can't burn in a flood zone. So we sort of already have that in play, and it just seems like this is almost redundant for us, I guess.
It's a pretty small change.
Yeah. So.
And yet-
I'm apprehensive because it seems like an awfully lot of effort for such a small change.
Well, it's actually
So I'm always concerned that there's something that's not being told us yet.
Well, and I appreciate that, so that's why I'm going to the meeting. It's actually very little effort as far as there's no cost.
Yeah.
It's a series of meetings that we have, and a couple of letters are going out, a couple of meetings. And yet what it reflects, and this is where if you look at the 10-year, 15, 20-year evolution in our society, is a growing awareness of the environment that we live in. And, excuse me, and the need to protect certain resources. And I think this is where it's not hard to look back 15, 20 years and think about where we want to be in 15 or 20 years from now, and realize that this is one small step that we can do to protect this land.
Well, I guess my point would be that the Class 2 classification already protects that.
It's just a little bit different. Very little difference.
Well,
They probably thought it was wise to build on Newton Road once.
Yeah.
They obviously were.
But times are changing. Things are different.
Times change.
We're hopefully smarter.
All right, well, I think this has been a good airing of a lot of different points of view. I think everybody probably has a little bit more information than they had 10 minutes ago. about the process and about concerns about various interested stakeholders. And it appears that the select board's not really the venue to do any deciding about it, but it appears that the steering committee is taking input and hosting public meetings.
But didn't the policy that when we get all done, that it is the select board that's going to make that decision whether it stays class 2 or class 1 wetland?
I don't recall.
I believe that was the way that I, did you understand it that way, Wayne? The way that I understood it, when she was here doing her presentation, and when we got all done, the select board is going to be the one that for being a class.
I thought it was more like her biologists and her department were going to make it.
To tell you the truth, this was made clear in a couple different meetings. Anybody, Joe Schmo on the street, can file a petition to request that the swamp be made into class 1. Anybody.
Right.
And you can draw those boundaries any way you want. You can make it big, small, any direction you want, and you could submit that. And then it goes into this very lengthy process where scientists and public has a chance to input, and and it gets worked through, and after the end, it either gets approved or not approved. And so while the town has a voice in suggesting how they would like to see that boundary made, and if in fact the town makes their case that they don't want Brandon to be any part of this, they can etch out Brandon and make the class 1 part of the swamp exclude Brandon.
But who's they? Like they?
This commission that's making the petition.
Not us.
Not us.
Right.
And it's just a group of private citizens who are trying to protect the wetlands. That's their whole thing. And so, if you wanted to make the case that Brandon really strongly disagrees with this and were vocal about it, they would probably make that political decision of, well, it's not worth it enough to us to fight this. We'll just carve Brandon out and work around that. And yet, by the same token, even if we said that, they could say, well, it's still scientifically rational for us to include this because, in fact, the wetland does go down here and it does produce these services, and so we should want this. And then it would go into the process, and once again, you'd have public comment and all this, but the select board has no say one way or another what this commission...
Like I said, I thought that I understood from her at that meeting, it was going to be that decision.
Right.
So who's going to make the decision?
The
This commission of people who
This
has no relationship to the voting population, somebody who has their own interest.
Right.
I'm just curious, because I'm not sure what you said is wrong yet.
No,
We're going to add a couple more 100 more feet on this edge. We're protecting the wetlands. What's it being protected from? Because the laws apparently already exist, the regulations already exist.
What it's protecting from is degradation. It's protecting the resource
From what?
from degradation, either in the form of development.
Is
or
development
in the form of-
permitted? Didn't you say, so development isn't permitted, so that's already not going to be a problem. So what else is the problem?
No, it's true. It's a very small change.
I don't think it is, but that's okay. It sounds like somebody's straining at a gnat to swallow and swallowing a camel here for some reason,
Must be
because
maintained,
there's-
and sometimes
I'm sorry,
it needs to be widened twice.
I'm just curious what we're being protected from.
Dr. Lund, we just have some order.
All they're asking is one question, what are we protecting it from? So far, everything that we're being protected from is already protected from, so why change anything?
It strengthens the protection.
You need more than just somebody telling me that, because you've got people here saying they're going to want to do this, but they're not elected. They apparently have no connection to anything that is legally authoritative that I can tell.
Their submission of this petition is not legal in any ways. In other words, anybody in this room could decide they want to submit a petition to change the classification.
So who's going to
It's
make
not-
the change?
It's not an authority.
So
And then it goes into the state process. And once it
So
starts,
the state will decide it.
no, then the state has.
I'm not trying to fight with you, I'm just saying,
I'm trying to tell you.
okay, go ahead.
And then there's a series of processes that go on, meetings and discussions, and in the end,
Who?
I don't know what the names of the boards are. There are the state level boards.
So it's probably going to be state government in the end that's going to actually determine this.
Determine whether they allow the classification.
Okay, that's what I really wanted to know. So who's really going to, because you mentioned this group and there's meetings, and that's pretty nebulous for a simple mind like my own.
But the landowners have to buy into the process.
The landowners have input.
Yeah.
Dr. Lawton has some more.
It says in the paper, this is where I first saw it, I had no inkling until it came out in the Addison last week. The petition would go to the Secretary of State, who would submit to the ICAR, Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules. The ICAR would ultimately submit it to the LCAR, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. If there is broad support, it could adopt the rule.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Thank you for that.
Mr. Adams.
Would it be possible to get a copy of the proposed regulations for what this would do? So what's gonna happen if this changes to class 1? Is there like a document already drafted saying here's the rules you need to follow? I know it's a final one over, but I think if there's something in writing that would be.
Yeah, we actually have a one-page summary of the difference between class 2 and class 1. I can get that to you.
Yeah, I think
You
that
have
might.
it in the printout I gave you.
It's in this one?
Yeah. I didn't know, it's in the other one I gave you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think
But
that.
that's only one page, but it's not in its entirety. There's other stuff that I didn't submit.
Zapata sent us her whole presentation, right, by email or something like that, so we could maybe we could have that available at the town office.
So I was wondering if that would be something we should maybe put on the town website so folks could see
Yeah,
the
that's a
difference
great
between
idea.
a class 1 and a class 2.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Russ Jones.
If the town were to decide if they wanted to be either for or against this and tell the committee that, when would they need to tell them by? Because they said they wanted to get it done by August, that's when they want to put the petition in. If they put the petition in August and you haven't told your feelings one way or the other, it'll be too late after that, right?
No, they're going to have public meetings in the end of June. They have 2 of them. And that's when they're going to be, gauging public support and figuring out what they want to do. There is no real deadline, because as I said, they can make the boundary, whatever they want to make the boundary for their petition, which is what any private person can do. And so, there's no deadline.
But I guess from what I understand from this question, he's asking, do they have a time frame for when they're planning to submit this out of their steering committee?
I think they're hoping to submit it by the end of the summer, by the end of
Right,
August.
so I think what he's saying is if we want to support or oppose it, the train will have sailed, right, as we say in Granite, by the end of the summer.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Frank?
I was here for the presentation. I was confused about the mapping. Are they mapping it? There seemed to be kind of this thing about it would be mapped or it's not mapped. It's currently
It's
not
currently
mapped.
mapped as a class 2 swamp.
Okay.
And when it becomes class 1, there's certain mapping requirements that are a little more strenuous, but they're still working from the class 2 swamp boundaries.
Anything further? I think something to keep thinking about, something to keep an eye on. I think that's a great idea. Mr. Atherton put the presentation that the select board saw, we put the document on the town website. And then we have some communication about the dates of the 2 public meetings in June, right? We should also get that on the website. Very good. No further.
I can have the presentation on my phone and I can send it to you, Dave.
I've got it.
Oh, you got it,
Yeah,
right.
I'll send it to us after
Okay.
the whole thing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that conversation. So we'll move on to an update from Mr. Giles and Mr. Bailey, or just Mr. Giles, about the transfer station.
Yeah, we're making good progress. We met with Stephanie and Kevin, and I subsequently met with Daryl and Dave. And there's a growing common ground for us to build a better contract. Doug and I have plans to meet with Stephanie at the transfer station Thursday morning at 10 to answer some of the questions that were brought up by Dave and Daryl, and to put together a tentative contract, which I'm hoping to have for the next board meeting for us to look at and decide whether this is something we want to do.
So that's exciting news. There's possibility of motion there.
Right.
We're not at any kind of loggerheads situation.
No, if anything, I think we've eased some of the tension, and there's good conversation going on. We've come up with some creative solutions. I mean, one of the ones that I can give for the town reporter to, is that, you know, the scale, which was kind of a sticking point, we've actually found a very low cost option through a portable set of scales that the town might be able to use in other ways. And so this is a win-win. It's one that they might be able to use at the transfer station, and one that we might be able to use to weigh trucks that are overweight. So there are things like that where I think we're finding you know, creative solutions and common ground.
It's great to hear.
Yeah, it was a very cordial meeting, and they were very willing to come to the table, discuss the contract, short term, you know, where we've been concerned with how vague the last contract was. They were very helpful, and even if there's any changes down the road, they're helpful to help facilitate the change if need be. So I thought it was a very positive meeting.
Well, thank you both for going to represent the select board with them, and for coming back with good news. And we'll look forward to some more developments. Any other comments, questions? Okay, if not, the next item is the Hildreth Landon fund request. I do want to alert the board, I have a real conflict of this, right? So I'm on the committee making the request for the fund disbursement. So I think for best practices, I think I should at least get off the board table and let Mr. Bailey run the discussion. And I'll sit in the room here if that's okay with the board, or if you want, I'll leave the room.
You have to ask her nicely.
So the Brandon Chamber and the designated downtown have done the concerts in the park, and they've done it behind the town, the Brandon Inn for the last couple of years. And it's gone over well. They were looking to do some upgrading. So I'm just going to give you a little summary here, something I kind of went over a little bit here. Hildreth Landon died in 1980 and left $3,000 to the town for a bandstand and town trees. The current balance in the fund is $8,000, so it's done well for a low fund. Fortunately, Segment 6 is replacing all the downtown trees, plus many more, so our trees are taken care of for quite a while. Like I said, the current concert series has moved to a larger space behind the Brandon Inn. This is the third year that's been at no cost to the town at all, which has been phenomenal and well attended. 100 concert goers go every Wednesday in July and August, sometimes more. Very safe location, still within and still supporting our downtown, which is very nice. Brandon Rec Department's helped too to collaborate with, they built the popcorn machine and things like that. So it's, we've been good to do this. So anyway, the folks involved, the chamber, the designated downtown, Brandon Rec Department, would like to collaborate to build a new pavilion, kind of a barn raising style, behind the Brandon Town Inn. Geez, I might keep wanting to call it the Brandon Town Hawks, that's all I ever say. The Brandon Inn. And the inn has granted us an open-ended agreement for the concert series to use this structure and venue, which I believe they're hoping to pass it along even if the property is sold. And if there'll be some language of what happens if the folks decide they don't want us to do it, they get to buy the bandstand from us. Hildreth Landon money was given to us to be spent, not to be held as a permanent fund. And we'll make sure to honor her prominently in the new community pavilion. So, I guess to make the short story long there, the current balance is $8,000. We would like to see that the board use this money to build this new pavilion type thing for concerts in the downtown.
Do they need all 8,000?
more, 10 or 15.
So the estimate is coming in around $18,000, including electricity and some lights. We found in late August, sometimes it's a little bit too dark at 8 or 9 o'clock at night when we're winding up. So about 18,000. We've done about $5,000 worth of fundraising, and we have also made grant applications to the Walter Surf Community Foundation for additional funding. And the Chamber's providing some pretty good foundation support.
So the intention is to use all 8?
Yes.
Yeah, I make the motion that we spend all 8.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional conversation? Could I make a friendly amendment to the motion? I think that we should spend all 8, but I think that there should be a plaque on it, or call it the Hildreth Landon gazebo or pavilion.
Yeah.
And more than 50% of the money coming from that one fund.
Who's going to maintain it? We just had this transfer station discussion. Who's going to maintain it?
I'm not raising my hand because I'm going to maintain it. I just want to answer. So, you all know Sarah and Louie at the Brandon Inn, right? They have been, I think, super gracious. They are like Brandon's living room. I always say they let a lot of people use that building and the grounds for no money at all. So they're going to pay the property taxes on it because we warned them the town was going to assess them on it. They're going to do the maintenance. They're going to provide the electricity.
Amazing.
And part of the open-ended agreement is that, as Mr. Atherton mentioned, if and when the inn sells, that will be made binding on the new owners, and/or if at some point the new owners don't want to proceed, they'll buy the pavilion back from the group so that we can build a new one someplace else. But we think that this is the prime location to do it.
That's excellent. Bravo.
Fabulous.
Further discussion? None heard? All in favor of donating $8,000 from the Hildreth Landon
Mr.
Fund,
Bailey?
say aye.
Part of this, in talking with the town treasurer, part of the plus of this to her would be to close out the fund. So could we maybe say to close the fund entirely and use the proceeds rather than the flat number? There's like 8,051 and some change or something.
Amend your motion to say that?
To close out the fund.
You'll second that? Okay. So now, we have a motion and a second to close out the Hildreth Landon Fund with all monies going to build a new pavilion by the Brandon Inn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No one? You may come back and run the remainder of the meeting, Mr. Hopkins, please. You guys are great.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Bailey. Oh, sorry. Okay, so item 7 is the warrants. Let's proceed with the warrants. Is there a motion on the first warrant?
Make a motion to approve the first warrant of $131,077.34.
Mr. Wyman moves the first warrant. Mr. Bailey seconds it. Any questions on the bills? If not, all in favor of the first warrant, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Item B, the Route 7 warrant.
I'll make a motion to approve the Route 7 warrant, the amount of $532,575.62.
Mr. Coolidge moves to approve.
Second.
Mr. Bailey seconds. Any discussion on the Route 7 warrant? This is a federal prompt pay warrant. All in favor of the Route 7 warrant as moved, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Any abstentions?
Aye.
Mr. Wyman abstains. Item C, the Bridge 114 warrant.
Make a motion to approve Bridge 114 warrant, the amount of $230,004.37.
Second.
Mr. Wyman moves and Mr. Bailey seconds Bridge 114 warrant. Any discussion? None heard. All in favor of the Bridge 114 warrant, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Any abstentions? The ayes have it. So that's a vote. So we'll recess the select board. Thank you. We will also, oh, what's this? In
That's
the
just
packet.
an information thing.
This is from the town clerk.
Town clerk.
Summary of upcoming statutory changes to the vital records law. Oh, that's right, she sent that to us. Okay. So at this time, we'll take a little recess to say our goodbyes. And then we'll do the sewer commission work and the executive session after that.
Great.